Welcome back to the TM Podcast. Today I'm going to talk about Jeffrey Dahmer. Before I get started though, I was going to make a change to the format of the show. After October, on November 1st, I will be migrating all of the paranormal episodes over to Patreon only. This way, the patrons get exclusive content and it keeps the primary theme of the public version of the podcast true crime. What this means is that all of the episodes that aren't true crime will still be available, but on November 1st, they will no longer be available anywhere on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you listen on. I'd also like to thank one of the sponsors of this podcast, MyMedic.com. MyMedic makes the best first aid kits on the planet. They're the one-stop destination for all of your medical gear needs. Their kits are designed for everyone. Home, car, work, specific activity, they've got it covered. Their supplies have been tested by all of the experts and their goal is to keep you prepared while you're out doing what you love. Now, Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21st, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His mother, Joyce, was a teletype machine instructor. If you're wondering what that is, the teletype machine is an electromechanical typewriter that communicated via simple electric communication channels. It is now obsolete. Sounds cool though. Jeffrey's father, Lionel, was in college to be a chemist at the time of his birth. His early life was kind of vague before school. Some people say as an infant he was fine and his parents loved him, and other sources say the opposite. When he was 4 years old, he had to have a double hernia surgery that kind of made him a quiet, shy, unenergetic child. When he was just starting school, his mother spent most of her time in bed dealing with an illness, and his father spent most of his time in college. When his father was home, he spent most of the time with his mother, so it left young Jeffrey alone most of the time. He describes his earliest memories being of his parents arguing. His mother even tried committing suicide when he was young using Equanil pills, which is a mild tranquilizer, and I know I mispronounced it, but you get the point. In school, Jeffrey seemed quiet and reserved and didn't make many friends. The friends he did make knew him to be weird as hell. They said that he would collect dead insects and even dead animals. He would keep the insects in jars and usually would take roadkill and dismember them at home or in the woods. He kept the dismembered animals in jars as well. It said that he was just, quote, interested in how the animals fit together. Normal humans in this situation would probably read a book about it, but instead, we all know that he wasn't normal by any means. It's said that his fascination started when he watched his father remove some animal bones from underneath their house one time. The way the bones cracked and broke visibly excited him, and it was all downhill from there. At one point, he decapitated a dead dog and put the head on a stake and nailed the body to a tree. At that point, he started killing animals pretty regularly, and at this point, he had developed a full-on obsession with death and dismemberment. In October of 1966, the Dahmer family moved to Doylestown, Ohio. During this time, Joyce gave birth to another son, David. Jeffrey's father finally completed college and started working as an analytical chemist in Akron. Just 2 years later, they would move again to Bath, Ohio. And over dinner one night, Jeffrey asked his father what would happen if the bones inside the chicken they were eating were put into bleach. His father thought he asked the question because he was curious about science and learning and not because he was just already a fucking psychopath, so he showed him. He showed him how to bleach and preserve bones. Neat. Not at all crazy bit of knowledge for a young child who's already interested in dismemberment to have. So, of course, Jeffrey uses this knowledge to start better preserving his already large collection of animal bones. Totally normal. When he gets to high school, he is obviously an outcast. Thinking back to high school, I can't remember a single conversation that I had with someone about dismembering animals, so maybe he just couldn't find anyone with similar interests. Which is probably a good thing, actually. He was known to sneak alcohol into school and drink during classes. The teachers there must have worn garbage cans over their heads not to see a 14-year-old drinking or being drunk. Usually, a blind man can spot an underage drinker from at least a mile away, so I'm genuinely confused as to how it wasn't noticed by capable adults. He also played tennis and was in band. and I'm not sure how you would do either one of those things while drunk as a child, but he made it happen. At some point during this time, he discovered that he was gay. He didn't tell anyone, but apparently he had a short relationship as a teen, but nothing happened and no one ever knew about it. As he progressed through school, he started developing a fantasy of dominating a completely submissive partner. Somehow, in his mind, he started to mix this fantasy with his fascination of dissection and death. When he was 16, he decided that he was going to knock a jogger that he thought was attractive, unconscious, and have sex with his body while he was out. He actually got a baseball bat and hid in the bushes waiting for this guy, but on that day, for some reason, he didn't come by. Lucky him. Jeffrey didn't try again on the same person, but he did say that was his very first try to attack something that wasn't animal. In the meantime, his grades started dropping and he started acting out in school. His parents hired him a tutor, but it didn't help. In class or even public sometimes, he would pretend to have seizures or just act handicapped to draw attention to himself. He did this so often that the other students coined the phrase, doing a Dahmer, when someone did something crazy for attention. I bet those people feel terribly uncomfortable thinking about that now. Towards the end of his time in high school, his parents got a divorce and his father moved out. He graduated in May of 1978 somehow, as he had become an alcoholic with severe mental issues at this point. His father had moved out and his mother and younger brother had moved to Wisconsin. This left 18-year-old Jeffrey Dahmer alone in a home. With no one there to guide him, he immediately became the killer that we know today. Only 3 weeks after graduation, he committed his first murder. He picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. He was 19 years old at the time, and when Jeffrey picked him up, they went to his house and drank and listened to music. This went on for a few hours, but when Stephen decided that he wanted to leave, Jeffrey had other plans. As he sat in a chair, Jeffrey came up behind him and hit him in the back of the head with a 10-pound dumbbell. He then choked him to death on the floor. He stripped him of all of his clothes and masturbated onto his body. The next day, he dismembered his body and buried him in the backyard. A few weeks later, he decided that that wasn't good enough and dug him back up. He dissolved his flesh with acid and flushed it down the toilet. He crushed the bones up with a hammer and spread them in the woods behind his house. 6 weeks later, his father and new fiancée moved back into the house unaware of what had happened there. Jeffrey decided that he would go to college, but he failed terribly. He dropped out after only 3 months and went back home. In January of 1979, he enlisted in the United States Army and became a medic. He made it through all the training and was stationed in West Germany. While he was there, he allegedly drugged and raped 2 other soldiers on separate occasions. I believe that these people came forward after the fact, or it would have been a completely different situation. His performance slowly started to deteriorate and his alcohol abuse got worse. It was bad enough that he was deemed unfit for military duty and was discharged in 1981. Somehow, he was honorably discharged, and that's kind of why I said I don't think the rapes were a known thing at the time. When he left the Army, he went to Miami, Florida to get away from the cold and got a job at a deli. I also learned today that deli is short for delicatessen, which is just a ridiculous word, and I'm happy that it was shortened. Anyway, it didn't last very long as he spent all of his paycheck on alcohol and couldn't pay rent. He eventually called his dad and moved back to Ohio. His alcohol problem followed him, and only a few weeks after returning, he was arrested for disorderly conduct and put in jail for a few days. His dad couldn't get him to stop drinking, so he decided that he would send him to live with his grandmother back in Wisconsin, hoping that he would straighten up living with her. And believe it or not, it seemed to have worked at first. He went to church with his grandmother every Sunday, and he got a job as a phlebotomist at a blood and plasma center. On August 7, 1982, he was arrested for indecent exposure when he exposed himself to a group of around 25 women and children in a park. I assume there was a field trip or something, but he was only fined $50 in court costs for that offense and went right back into society. The job he had lasted for around 10 months before he was laid off. After that, he would go without a job for 2 entire years, living off of an allowance from his grandmother. He eventually got a job as a mixer at a local chocolate factory. This was a 6-day-a-week steady job, and it got some money back into his pockets. He started going to gay bars around town, and his sexual urges became increasingly uncontrollable to the point that he stole a store mannequin and kept it in his closet to masturbate on. His grandmother found it and made him throw it away. I can imagine that was probably the weirdest thing that she had ever seen, because as you'll see, the further we get along into this, she doesn't see fucking anything apparently. So he was hooking up with people from the gay bars pretty frequently, but it wasn't enough for him. He said that the way people moved when they were having sex bothered him. So he started slipping sleeping pills into people's drinks and taking them home and raping them while they were unconscious. Someone found out that this was happening and banned him from one of the bathhouses that he was frequently going to. He also said that during this time, he read an obituary about a young boy and decided that he was going to dig up the body after the funeral and have sex with it. But when he got to the graveyard, the ground was too hard and he changed his mind. Which is kind of weird. Necrophilia, okay. Manual labor, not okay. But anyways, in August of 1986, he was caught masturbating in front of 2 young boys near a river and was put on probation for a year. On November 20th, 1987, he met a man at a bar and persuaded him to come back to his hotel room that he had rented. Dahmer said his plan was to drug and rape him, as he had done several other times, but something else happened. When Jeffrey woke up, he discovered the man dead beside him in the bed. His chest was crushed in and he had bruises all over him. He said that he did not remember killing him at all. He left the hotel, bought a large suitcase, put his body inside of it, and went back to his grandmother's house. He kept it there for a week and then dismembered it by cutting all of the flesh off and chopping it into small pieces and crushing the bones up with a hammer. He then put all of it except for the skull into trash bags and threw it away. He said the entire dismemberment process took around 2 hours, probably because he had been practicing this for his entire life. One element of this that confuses me every single time I look into it is that his grandmother immediately found a hidden store mannequin in a closet, but had no idea there was a rotting corpse in her house for a week. And on top of that, Jeffrey kept the head just wrapped in a blanket. Then he literally boiled the head and tried to bleach the bones so he could keep masturbating with it, but it kept falling apart, so he crushed it with a hammer and threw it away. Where the hell was his grandmother when all this stuff is going on? Jeff went on to murder 2 more individuals in the exact same way in the house while his grandmother was just absolutely oblivious to the entire thing. He would take the bodies to the cellar for dismemberment, and as far as she knew, he was just hanging out. Typical live-in 27-year-old grandson type stuff. In September of 1988, his grandmother finally asked him to move out. She didn't like that he kept bringing men over late at night, and she said that his room stank. Yeah, no shit, Grandma, there are dead bodies in there. He quickly found an apartment and it was business as usual. He lured a 13-year-old boy and paid him to pose nude and then drugged and fondled him. He didn't kill him though, and the boy told police as soon as he left there. He was arrested and charged with sexually assaulting a minor. His sentencing was suspended until May of 1989, so during that time he moved back in with Grandma and killed another person. This time, he dismembered the victim in his grandmother's bathtub and kept the head and genitals. He stored those items in his work locker. I imagine everyone around this guy was breaking their necks just to look in the other direction. I mean, if I bring a sandwich to work, everyone's like, "Hey, what you got there?" Much less a head and a literal bag of dicks. So, in May, he was sentenced to 5 years probation and 1 year in a house of corrections, and he had to register as a sex offender. He was also allowed to keep his job through work release. After his stay in the House of Corrections, he moved back into the grandmother's house for a bit and then moved into a small apartment. He still had the head and genitals of one of his victims with him when he moved. I don't know where he put it or stored it during that time, but okay. As soon as he moved in, he killed another person and dismembered them in a similar fashion as others and kept a skull. He kept the 2 skulls he had in a metal filing cabinet as if it was just a regular item to have laying around. He tried to kill another person, but accidentally drank the wrong drink, and he's the one that passed out. When he woke up, he realized the person had stolen a few items, but he obviously wasn't going to report it. Imagine being that guy. Super lucky. He would go on to kill another person, but he started to experiment with different ways of preserving the bones this time. He tried freezing the skeleton to remove the moisture, but it didn't work. He also tried putting the skull in the oven, but it exploded and he had to discard it. This made him very remorseful because he said, quote, "It was my way of remembering their physical beauty," when he kept remains. His next victim was 22-year-old Ernest Miller. He convinced him to come home with him, and then he slit his throat when the sleeping pills didn't work. He posed his nude body and took some pictures and then dismembered him. He actually kept the majority of the meat this time so that he could eat it. He figured out a way to bleach the skeleton to allow for better preservation and kept the skull amongst the others. He had started to paint and enamel them so that they would stay together longer. He murdered another young male a few weeks later, but decided that once he had him in his house, he wasn't really that attracted to him. So he just killed and dismembered him anyways, but he didn't keep anything. He did take pictures of the dismemberment process though, which would later be how that one person was identified. He went about 5 months without killing anyone after that. In early 1991, he killed and dismembered 2 more people, but in one instance, he tried to drill a hole into the victim's head and pour hydrochloric acid in while they were still alive. He had hoped that it would put the person into some type of permanent submissive state, but it didn't work, and he killed him. Around the same time, people in neighboring apartments had began complaining of foul odors coming from Jeffrey's apartment. He told the manager that his freezer had broken and his food had spoiled. And also, he later said that some pet fish that he had died, but he had taken care of it. On May 26, 1991, he lured a 14-year-old boy into his home with the offer of money for nude photos. When he was in the home, he drugged him and had sex with him. While he was still unconscious, he drilled a small hole into his head and poured hydrochloric acid inside of the hole. When he woke, he took the boy to his bedroom where he had the remains of a body just laying in the floor. The boy didn't really seem to react to it, so he thought that his experiment had worked. And to celebrate, Jeffrey drugged him again, left him in the apartment, and went out to the bar to have a drink. When he was returning early the next morning, he saw the boy sitting naked on the street corner. He tried to take the body, but there were women there saying that they had called the police already. When the police arrived, he told them that the boy was just his 19-year-old drunk boyfriend and they had an argument, but everything was okay. The women argued that the boy was bleeding out of his anus and his head, and the police told him to shut up and mind their business. Believe it or not, the police let him take the boy back to his home. When the officers walked the boy to the apartment, Jeffrey showed them some nude photos that he had taken of the boy to prove that they were together. Listen to the audio of the 911 call and then the police's response to the situation after.
Okay, hi, I'm on 25th and State, and this is young man. He is butt naked. He has been beaten up. He is very bruised up. He can't stand. He's study fall out. He is butt naked. He has no clothes on. He was really hurt. And I ain't got no cord on him. I just seen him, and he needs some help.
Where is he at?
On 25th and State, the corner of 25th and State.
And here's what they had to say about it.
The intoxicated boyfriend of another boyfriend.
Well, how old was this child?
It wasn't a child, it was an adult.
The intoxicated Asian naked male was returned to his sober boyfriend, and we're at 8.
That night, soon after the police left, he killed the boy and spent the next day dismembering the body. Jeffrey would kill several other young males in the next few months, each time experimenting with ways to keep them alive and submissive, failing, and then dismembering them, eating some of them, and keeping their heads. Several times he did this, he would request off from work so he could have more time with the remains, and they eventually fired him for it. After he was fired, he killed another person just to let them decompose for a few days in his bed, just to see what happened, before dismembering them. On July 22, 1991, he offered 32-year-old Tracy Edwards $100 to come pose for some nude photos in his apartment. He agreed, but when he got to the apartment, he said that it smelled horrid and he could see hydrochloric acid. Jeffrey told him that he used it to clean bricks. And I guess that was okay with him, so they continued to talk a little bit, and Jeffrey tried to sneak handcuffs onto Tracy's wrists. He only got it on one, and Tracy asked, "What are you trying to do?" And he just responded by saying, "Come to the bedroom, let's take these pictures." So, for some reason, he goes to the bedroom, and when he gets to Jeffrey Dahmer's bedroom, he noticed a lot of nude male posters on all of the walls, and The Exorcist was playing on TV, and there was a blue 55-gallon drum in the corner of the room. Jeffrey must have noticed that he was starting to panic and pulled a knife out on Tracy and told him just to be still for the pictures. Tracy asked if he would please put the knife away and take the handcuffs off, and Jeffrey completely ignored him and pressed his head against his chest and touched him with a knife and told him that he was going to eat his heart. Tracy could see what was happening and just kept trying to make Jeffrey think that he was his friend and told him that he wasn't going to run away, but he needed to go to the restroom. After that, he asked if they could go to the living room, and Jeffrey said yes. Tracy waited until Jeffrey wasn't focused for a split second and then punched him in the face and ran out of the apartment. He found some police officers and told them exactly what had happened. They tried to remove the handcuff off of them, but their key wouldn't work. Tracy said that he would take them and show them the apartment that he had been at. When they get to the door, Jeffrey lets all of them in and said yes, he was the one that handcuffed him and that they could get the key and take it off of him. The police officer said that he would go get it, so Jeffrey told him where it was at in his bedroom. When the police officer reached to grab the key, he spotted some Polaroid photos. He looked at them and discovered that the pictures were of bodies in varying stages of dismemberment. He also realized that the pictures were taken inside the same apartment. When he brought them out of the room, he showed the other officer, and Jeffrey realized what was about to happen, and he tried to take off. He tried to fight the officers, but they easily overpowered him and arrested him. As they were arresting them, he said, quote, "For what I did, I should be dead." Yeah, no shit. The search of his apartment revealed 4 severed heads in his kitchen, 7 skulls inside a closet, 2 hearts and an arm muscle in his refrigerator, an entire torso and a bag of organs in a freezer, 2 entire skeletons, a pair of severed hands, 2 penises, a scalp, and 2 torsos dissolving in acid. They also found almost 100 photographs of nude victims as well as dismembered ones. The next day, he confessed to killing 17 young men since 1978. He admitted that not only did he kill, he dismembered, performed necrophilia, and ate parts from almost all of his victims. He said that he was trying to create an altar out of all of the remains that he had in his possession to display in his apartment. He said that if they had given him just a few more months, it would have been completed. He tried unsuccessfully to plead insanity, and he was sentenced to life in prison. He became a born-again Christian in prison, as many in his situation do, but was very vocal that he was ready to die and didn't care if something happened to him. In July of 1994, someone tried to slit his throat, but he didn't die. Apparently it just barely cut him, and he continued on. But in November 28th of 1994, inmate Christopher Scarver beat Jeffrey Dahmer to death in the shower of the prison gym. He also beat an inmate named Jesse Anderson to death as well. He returned to his cell and said, quote, "God told me to do it. Jeffrey Dahmer and Jeffrey Anderson are dead." After discovering that he was dead, Jeffrey's mother said, quote, "Now is everyone happy? Now that he's been bludgeoned to death, is that good enough for everyone?" Hell yeah. Not sure why she asked that, but that was the unanimous answer from literally everyone. After death, his estate was auctioned off with the goal of recouping money to the families of the victims. A civil group and a real estate developer pledged around $500,000 to buy everything, and then they destroyed it and threw it into a landfill. The apartment complex where he lived was destroyed and is now a vacant lot. The city had planned on making a memorial playground, but that plan failed due to the citizens calling it the Devil's Playground before it even got started. It should bring you joy to know that the 2 police officers that gave the victim back to Jeffrey Dahmer were fired. Probably should have been more than that, but I'll take it. The names of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims in order were Stephen Hicks, 18, Stephen Talmy, 26, Jamie Doxtater, 14, Richard Guerrero, 25, Anthony Sears, 24, Eddie Smith, 36, Ricky Beeks, 27, Ernest Miller, 22, David Thomas, 23, Curtis Straughter, 16, Errol Lindsay, 19, Tony Hughes, 31, Konerak Synthasomphone, 14, Matt Turner, 20, Jeremiah Weinberger, 23, Oliver Lacey, 23, and Joseph Bradholt. Let me know your thoughts on this case by interacting with any of the posts or messaging me directly. Don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe on whatever you're listening on. If you would like to choose what content I cover, head on over to patreon.com/thetmpodcast and take advantage of that as well as many other exclusive options. Thank you for listening to the TM Podcast.